Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a vast battlefield. To your left, the Roman legions are lined up, their shields gleaming under the sun, disciplined and ready. To your right, the Persian immortals, an elite force of warriors, stand tall and steadfast, their attire adorned with intricate patterns that shimmer in the desert wind. Their eyes fixed forward, both armies are about to clash, but the very structure of their military forces tells a story long before a single weapon is raised. The Roman legion, with its renowned organization and strategy, was a formidable force in the ancient world. Rome's military success was built on the principles of discipline, training, and efficiency. Each soldier, a cog in the great machine of the empire, underwent years of rigorous training. Picture the daily grind of a Roman soldier, the constant drills, the never-ending marches, the weight of armor pressing against the shoulders. The Roman legions were the very backbone of Rome's expansion, and their tactics were as much about organization as they were about sheer might. You can almost hear the rhythmic stamping of boots on cobblestone, the steady breath of soldiers in unison, their shields forming an impenetrable wall. On the other side, the Persian immortals, with their name inspired by their seemingly endless replenishment, were an elite group of warriors, carefully selected for their strength and valor. Unlike the Roman legions, the immortals were known not just for their military prowess, but for their ability to inspire awe and fear in equal measure. Their strength was in their numbers, 10,000 strong, always appearing at full capacity, as the sick or injured were immediately replaced. Their reputation was built not just on the ability to fight, but on their presence, their psychological impact on both enemies and allies. Imagine yourself in the ranks of the immortals, surrounded by warriors clad in colorful silk and adorned with intricate helmets. You can feel the weight of history upon you, knowing that the fearsome reputation of the immortals has long outlived the ancient world. While the Roman legions relied on rigorous discipline and organization, the immortals thrived on the mystique of their name and the loyalty they inspired. Both military forces were exceptional, yet the Roman legion's structured approach to warfare, its ability to adapt, innovate, and outlast, allowed Rome to build an empire that spanned continents. The immortals, however, were less flexible. Their strength lay in their image, their ability to strike fear, and their initial successes. As you reflect on these contrasting armies, imagine yourself walking through the ruins of an ancient Roman fort, feeling the echo of the legion's disciplined marches, or perhaps standing in the shadow of a Persian palace, sensing the silent power of the immortals. Both civilizations, each in its own way, conquered vast lands, but the strategies they employed tell a deeper story of what it meant to rule and how power was projected. The Roman legions, built on order and structure, were unstoppable. The immortals, on the other hand, existed more as symbols of power, fearsome but ultimately less enduring. The contrasting nature of these two military forces reveals much about their respective civilizations, offering a glimpse into the different ways that power and authority were maintained. As we leave the battlefield, let's take a moment to imagine the contrasting sounds, the clatter of Roman armor and the soft swish of Persian robes. The tension, the anticipation of battle, gradually fading into the quiet of history. Imagine the world of ancient travel, where the roads you walk on could either make or break an empire. Picture yourself traveling along the long, dusty stretches of the Roman roads, which seem to stretch endlessly across the empire. The ground beneath your feet is solid, meticulously paved, and perfectly aligned, a marvel of engineering. You can almost hear the steady rhythm of your footsteps echoing in the quiet air, the sun warming your back as the scent of fresh stone and earth fills the air. These roads, constructed with an almost obsessive attention to detail, are not merely for movement. They represent the very lifeblood of Roman expansion. The Roman road network was one of the empire's most remarkable achievements. Thousands of miles of roads crisscrossed the empire, designed with the precision of a master architect, enabling swift movement of armies, goods, and messages. The roads were built to endure, their layers of gravel, sand, and stone designed to withstand time and weather. These roads, known as vied, were the arteries through which the empire pulsed. Along these roads, soldiers could march swiftly, trade could flourish, and information could travel with remarkable speed. The phrase, "all roads lead to Rome," captures not just a literal truth, but the essence of Rome's strategic mastery. Now, contrast this with the Persian Royal Road, a vast network of roads that spanned over 1,500 miles, stretching from Susa in Persia to Sardis in Lydia. Picture yourself in Persia, traveling along this ancient highway, where the scent of warm spices from bustling markets mixes with the dry, wind-swept air of the steppes. The Royal Road, unlike the Roman system, was less about engineering precision and more about facilitating trade and communication across a diverse empire. This road, dotted with caravanserais, was the lifeblood of the Persian Empire, used by merchants, diplomats, and the royal messengers known as the Angarium. It's easy to imagine the rhythm of Persian caravans as they make their way along the road, horses' hooves gently pounding the dust, their distant calls echoing across the plains. While both roads served as vital lifelines for their respective empires, the Persian Royal Road was not designed with the same military precision as the Roman roads. It was, instead, a magnificent highway for commerce, diplomacy, and the movement of royal orders. The Persian kings understood the importance of connectivity but were more focused on facilitating trade and ensuring that royal decrees were delivered swiftly. The Roman roads, however, were primarily designed for the efficient movement of legions and the consolidation of power. Their durability and extensive network were unparalleled, enabling Roman dominance on an unprecedented scale. As you walk along the Roman road, you feel the sense of power and control that comes with it. It is a road that leads not just to distant lands, but into the heart of empire itself. On the Persian Royal Road, however, you feel the pulse of the empire not through military might, but through the ebb and flow of commerce and diplomacy. The Persian road was a lifeline, yes, but one that carried the weight of trade and culture rather than the steel of Roman swords. The contrast between these two road systems reveals much about their respective empires. The Roman roads, with their discipline and order, reflect the highly organized and militaristic nature of Roman society. The Persian Royal Road, with its focus on trade and cultural exchange, speaks to a more diplomatic approach to empire building. Each road was essential to the survival of their respective empires, yet they highlight different priorities. One focused on military control and the other on economic and political flexibility. As we move on from the roads themselves, imagine the soft hum of traders and soldiers moving along these paths, each step carrying the weight of history, yet gently fading into the distant past. As we continue our journey, let's now step back and take a broader view, one that stretches over the rise and eventual challenges faced by both Rome and Persia. Imagine yourself standing in the midst of two powerful civilizations, each facing distinct challenges and opportunities. In one direction, the Roman Empire rises, its legions sweeping across the Mediterranean and beyond, laying the foundations for a legacy that will stretch through centuries. In the other, the Persian Empire, a vast land of deserts and mountains, struggles with its own internal and external forces, trying to maintain control over a sprawling territory. Let's begin with Rome. The rise of Rome was not a sudden event. It was a slow and steady climb, a process of growth, conquest, and adaptation. Imagine yourself on the banks of the Tiber River, watching as Rome begins as a small settlement, its people just beginning to spread their influence in the region. Rome's ascent was rooted in its ability to adapt and absorb the strengths of the peoples it encountered. The Romans were not necessarily the most innovative in terms of technology, but they excelled at organizing and adapting existing ideas to suit their needs. They learned from the Greeks, from the Etruscans, and from their other neighbors, improving upon their strategies and technologies. As Rome grew, it began to develop an organized military force unlike anything the world had seen. The Roman army, built on discipline and structure, was a key factor in Rome's expansion. Imagine the sound of marching boots as the legions moved across the battlefield, their formations unyielding. These soldiers were not just warriors. They were symbols of Rome's order and power. Their ability to maintain discipline, to march across vast distances, and to adapt to any situation was unparalleled. Over time, this army became the backbone of the empire, and with each victory, Rome's influence grew. It wasn't just about conquering lands. It was about establishing control, creating stability, and integrating new territories into the Roman system. But Rome's rise wasn't without its challenges. Even as the empire expanded, it faced internal struggles. The Republic, which had once prided itself on democratic principles, began to show signs of instability. Power struggles, class divisions, and corruption slowly eroded the Republic from within. The rise of powerful generals like Julius Caesar threatened the balance of power, and eventually, the Republic fell, replaced by the imperial system that would dominate for centuries to come. Now, let's turn our gaze to Persia, a civilization that, though mighty, faced very different challenges. The Persian Empire, founded by Cyrus the Great in the 6th century BC, was remarkable in its size and diversity. Imagine yourself standing in the grand halls of Persepolis, the capital of the Achaemenid Empire. Here, kings ruled over a vast territory, stretching from the Indus Valley in the east to Egypt in the west. This empire, built on tolerance and the integration of various cultures, was a marvel in its own right. Persia was known for its ability to govern a diverse population, with a system of satrapies, provinces overseen by local governors, each respecting the traditions of the people they governed. However, despite its size and splendor, Persia struggled with internal unrest. The vastness of the empire itself presented a unique set of challenges. Communication and control over such a large territory were difficult, and as the empire expanded, the logistical strains became more apparent. The Persian kings, like Darius I and Xerxes I, were skilled at managing a vast bureaucracy, but the centralization of power often led to problems. The Persian nobility had a strong influence, and there were frequent power struggles within the royal family. The relationship between the central government and the local satrapies was often tense, as the satraps wielded significant power of their own. Externally, Persia faced threats from powerful neighbors. The Greek city-states, for example, were a constant thorn in the side of Persia. The Persian Empire's attempts to conquer Greece, notably through the Persian Wars, met with stiff resistance. While Persia enjoyed early victories, such as the Battle of Marathon, it was ultimately unable to subdue Greece. The famous battles of Thermopylae and Salamis marked the beginning of Persia's decline in the region. Despite the might of the Persian Empire, it struggled to control the fiercely independent Greek city-states, whose resilience in battle was unmatched. The contrast between Rome and Persia's rises is striking. Rome's rise was marked by a series of calculated, strategic moves, both in military and political spheres. Rome excelled at organization and adaptation, consolidating power through its strong military and political reforms. Persia, on the other hand, was initially a force to be reckoned with due to its vastness and its ability to integrate diverse peoples. However, the internal challenges of governing such a large empire, along with external pressures from neighbors like Greece and later, the rise of Alexander the Great, proved to be significant obstacles. Rome's ability to adapt, reform, and absorb new territories was a key factor in its success. Even in the face of political instability, Rome managed to find a path forward. Persia, by contrast, was less flexible. The challenges of controlling a sprawling empire, combined with constant external threats, meant that Persia was often on the defensive. As we reflect on the contrasts between the two empires, you can almost hear the distant echoes of Roman legions marching into newly conquered lands, while Persian rulers, though powerful, struggled to maintain control over their vast empire. Rome's strategic prowess allowed it to endure, while Persia's vastness, though impressive, ultimately became a hindrance. Imagine yourself walking through the streets of ancient Rome, where order and stability defined the landscape, and then stepping into the expansive courts of Persia, where grandeur and complexity reign, but the pressures of governance seem to be just beyond the horizon. As we continue our exploration, we now turn our focus to the contrasting social structures of Rome and Persia. Two empires, vast and influential in their own right, each built upon a system that defined the rights, privileges, and duties of those who lived within them. In Rome, the concept of citizenship was a powerful force, one that carried with it certain responsibilities and privileges. In Persia, the nobility held the keys to power, shaping the fate of the empire through their influence and control over vast lands. Let's begin with Rome. The concept of Roman citizenship was a cornerstone of the Roman Empire, and it played a pivotal role in shaping the lives of its citizens. Imagine yourself in ancient Rome, walking through the bustling streets of the Forum, surrounded by the sounds of merchants haggling, citizens debating, and the ever-present hum of life. As a Roman citizen, you would have had access to certain rights and privileges that set you apart from non-citizens, or peregrini. These rights included the ability to vote, the right to legal protection, and even the privilege of serving in the Roman military. Roman citizenship was not initially granted to all of those who lived within the empire. In fact, it was a highly coveted status, one that evolved over time. At first, only those who lived within the city of Rome were considered citizens. However, as the empire expanded, Roman citizenship was gradually extended to other regions, sometimes as a reward for loyalty or military service. The granting of citizenship to provincial cities was a powerful tool for Rome to integrate newly conquered lands into its empire. It was a political strategy, designed to secure loyalty and maintain order in far-flung territories. Over time, citizenship became a symbol of privilege, a way of solidifying one's place within the empire. Imagine yourself in the crowded streets of a Roman city, a citizen among many, each of you sharing in the benefits of the Roman system. Citizens had the right to protection under Roman law, which was one of the most advanced legal systems of the ancient world. Roman law was based on the principles of fairness and justice, and it was designed to ensure that all citizens were treated equally in the eyes of the law. It was a system that promoted stability, allowing the empire to grow and prosper. But while Roman citizenship was a source of power and privilege, it was also a system that had its limitations. For those who were not citizens, life could be much more difficult. Non-citizens, often referred to as allies, had few rights and were at the mercy of the Roman state. In fact, one of the most contentious issues in Roman politics was the question of whether to extend citizenship to the many peoples living within the empire's borders. The struggle for citizenship became a powerful political issue, one that would shape the future of the empire. Now let's turn to Persia, where the concept of nobility played a central role in the empire's structure. In the Persian Empire, power was concentrated in the hands of the noble class, the Azad, and the royal family, who ruled over the satrapies, the provinces of the empire. These nobles were not just administrators, they were the power brokers of Persian society. Their wealth, influence, and control over land and resources made them the foundation of the empire's governance. Imagine yourself in the grand halls of the Persian palace, where noblemen and women gather, their silken robes brushing the cool stone floors, their faces marked by the weight of power. Persian nobles were granted their status through birthright, and their authority was largely hereditary. The ruling family, the Achaemenids, wielded immense power, but the empire's day-to-day governance was often left to the nobility. The Persian kings, though absolute in their authority, relied heavily on the support of the nobles to maintain control over the vast expanse of the empire. These nobles were granted large estates, which they governed with considerable autonomy. Their power was derived not from military prowess, as in Rome, but from their control over land and resources. The role of the Persian nobility was central to the functioning of the empire, but it was also a source of tension. The nobles were often in conflict with the satraps, the governors of the provinces, who had their own sources of power. This tension between the central authority of the king and the autonomy of the nobility created a delicate balance of power that was often fragile. Unlike Rome, where citizenship could be extended to bring unity and cohesion, Persia's nobility often found itself at odds with the diverse peoples and cultures that made up the empire. The vastness of the Persian Empire made it difficult to maintain centralized control, and the nobility's role in local governance sometimes led to conflicts that weakened the empire from within. While Rome's concept of citizenship was a unifying force, the Persian nobility's influence created a more decentralized form of governance. In Persia, power was often fragmented, with nobles controlling vast territories and maintaining their own armies. This created a system where loyalty to the central authority of the king was not always guaranteed. The Persian nobility, though powerful, could be as much a hindrance as a help to the empire, as local allegiances sometimes took precedence over loyalty to the crown. As we reflect on the differences between Roman citizenship and Persian nobility, we see two very different approaches to governance and power. In Rome, citizenship was a tool for integration, a way of uniting the empire under one system of law and order. In Persia, the nobility's power was more entrenched, rooted in the control of land and resources, but also marked by internal divisions that often weakened the empire's cohesion. Imagine walking through the Roman streets, where the sense of equality and order permeates the air, and then stepping into the vast halls of a Persian palace, where the nobility's influence is palpable in every corner. These contrasting systems reveal much about the priorities and challenges faced by each empire. Rome's citizenship system allowed for flexibility and unity, while Persia's nobility, despite its grandeur, faced the constant challenge of maintaining balance within a vast and diverse empire. Now that we've explored the grandeur of Roman public spectacles and Persian palaces, let's turn our attention to a crucial and often difficult subject: slavery. Slavery, although a practice seen in many ancient civilizations, played a central role in shaping the economies, social structures, and daily lives of both Rome and Persia. While the practice of slavery existed in both empires, the way it was integrated and its impact on society was deeply different. Let's start by stepping into the streets of ancient Rome. The air is thick with the sounds of everyday life, merchants calling out their wares, the rhythmic pounding of hammers from the workshops, and the bustling crowds moving through the forum. Slaves, though numerous, moved through these crowds quietly, almost invisible in the eyes of many. They are essential to the functioning of Roman society, though their presence often goes unnoticed by those who are not their masters. Slaves in Rome came from a variety of sources. Many were prisoners of war captured during the relentless campaigns of Roman expansion, while others were born into servitude. Slavery in Rome was not limited to a specific race or region, as slaves came from all corners of the empire. The condition of slaves could vary greatly depending on their roles, but the reality was that for most, life was hard and filled with hardship. Some slaves worked in the households of the wealthy, serving as tutors, cooks, or caretakers, while others labored in the fields, mines, or on construction sites. Those who worked in the mines or on large agricultural estates often faced brutal conditions and were treated with little regard for their well-being. Imagine yourself walking through the halls of a Roman villa, where slaves tend to the needs of their masters. These slaves, often educated and skilled, may be tasked with overseeing the education of children or managing the household's financial affairs. Their lives, though not as physically taxing as those who worked in the fields, were still marked by a lack of freedom. They had no legal rights, and their lives were entirely at the mercy of their masters. In many cases, they could be bought, sold, or even punished at the whim of their owners. While the living conditions for some Roman slaves may have been more tolerable, their lack of personal agency was universal. The Roman legal system did not recognize slaves as people with rights. They were considered property, an item that could be inherited, bought, or sold like any other asset. Even the most talented or skilled slaves, those who might manage vast estates or serve as military leaders, were still subject to the control of their masters. Roman society was built upon the backs of slaves, and their contributions, though significant, went largely unacknowledged. Now let's shift our gaze to Persia, where slavery was also practiced but in a somewhat different form. Imagine yourself walking through the grand palaces of Persepolis, where the air is thick with the scent of incense, and the sight of lavish royal banquets fills your mind. Slavery in Persia, while still a part of the empire, was not as deeply integrated into the economy and social fabric as it was in Rome. Persian slaves were often prisoners of war, debtors, or individuals who had fallen into slavery for other reasons. But unlike the Roman system, Persian slavery allowed for more flexibility and, in some cases, even social mobility. In the royal courts of Persia, for example, slaves could be elevated to positions of significant influence. Some slaves in Persia were able to serve in the elite ranks of the military or as high-ranking administrators in the royal court. The Persian kings, especially during the Achaemenid period, often relied on trusted slaves to manage vast territories and oversee administrative tasks. These individuals, while still slaves, held considerable power and influence, particularly in the later years of the empire. However, the majority of slaves in Persia worked in agriculture or domestic service. In comparison to the hard labor faced by their Roman counterparts in the mines or fields, Persian slaves working on the royal estates or in the homes of the elite might experience a life that was, at least in some cases, less physically demanding. But this does not mean that Persian slaves lived without hardship. They were still considered property and lacked the personal freedom that was the birthright of free Persians. Despite their potential for mobility, they were still bound by the constraints of their status. One striking difference between Roman and Persian slavery was the treatment of slaves. Roman slaves, as mentioned earlier, were often subject to harsh punishments and a strict hierarchy. Persian slaves, particularly in the royal courts, had more room to rise in status, but the conditions of their lives were still marked by the limitations of their servitude. While they might hold positions of power, they were still ultimately at the mercy of the king and the court. Roman slaves, due to the scale and organization of the Roman Empire, were a crucial part of the economy, working in various sectors including agriculture, industry, and the military. Persia, by contrast, did not rely on the same scale of slavery. The use of slaves in Persia was more limited to administrative and agricultural tasks, and the nobility, rather than an entire class of slaves, often managed the empire's wealth and resources. Both systems, however, shared a common thread: the exploitation of human labor for the benefit of the empire. The contrast lies in the integration of slavery into each empire's society and economy. In Rome, slavery was a central pillar, and slaves were used across all levels of society. In Persia, while slavery existed, The focus was more on maintaining power through a decentralized system of governance that relied on local elites and a smaller, more flexible use of slaves. The two systems, although different in scale and practice, reflect the ways in which both empires relied on a structure of dominance and control to maintain their power. Roman society was more rigid, with the vast majority of slaves living under strict conditions. Persian society, though still hierarchical, allowed for greater mobility, particularly for slaves who rose to prominence within the royal courts. As we continue to explore the foundational elements that shaped the Roman and Persian empires, we now turn our attention to their religious systems. Religion was a central force in both societies, influencing not only the everyday lives of individuals but also the broader structure of the empires themselves. While Roman religion was deeply tied to the practical and political aspects of life, Persian Zoroastrianism presented a more spiritual framework, one focused on the duality of good and evil and the responsibility of individuals to align with truth. The differences between these two belief systems are fascinating and reveal much about the nature of both empires. Imagine walking through the grand temples of Rome, where the air is filled with the sounds of rituals and prayers, and the scent of burning incense lingers in the cool breeze. Roman religion was not monotheistic but polytheistic, with a vast pantheon of gods and goddesses overseeing all aspects of life. The Romans believed that their gods were actively involved in the world, guiding everything from the harvest to the success of military campaigns. The gods were seen as powerful, yet their favor had to be earned through proper worship and ritual. Roman religion was closely intertwined with the political structure of the empire. The Senate, along with the priesthood, played a central role in determining religious practices, and the emperor himself was often seen as a divine figure or a representative of the gods. The idea of pax deorum, the peace of the gods, was central to Roman religion. If the gods were angered or neglected, it was believed that disaster could strike the empire, such as military defeat or famine. The rituals, from sacrifices to prayers, were performed with the utmost care to maintain the favor of the gods and ensure the prosperity of the empire. Roman gods were often human-like in their behavior, with personalities, desires, and flaws. The god Jupiter, for example, was the king of the gods, yet he was also known for his many affairs and unpredictable behavior. Venus, the goddess of love, was a figure of both beauty and passion. Roman religion, in many ways, reflected the complexities of human nature, as the gods themselves were mirrors of the virtues and vices that existed within Roman society. The gods were a reflection of the people, and the rituals and myths served not just to appease them but to maintain the social order and identity of the empire. Now, let's turn to the world of Zoroastrianism, the state religion of the Persian Empire, which presented a radically different view of the divine. Imagine standing in the heart of ancient Persia, where the teachings of the prophet Zoroaster, or Zarathustra, shaped the spiritual and moral foundations of the empire. Zoroastrianism is one of the oldest known monotheistic religions, centered around the worship of Ahura Mazda, the supreme god, who represents truth, light, and order. Unlike the polytheistic nature of Roman religion, Zoroastrianism focuses on a dualistic worldview, where Ahura Mazda is in an eternal struggle against Ingramenu, the spirit of chaos, lies, and destruction. The Persian religion emphasized the importance of moral choice and personal responsibility. Every individual was seen as playing a part in the cosmic struggle between good and evil. Imagine yourself as a follower of Zoroastrianism, waking up each day with the knowledge that your actions contribute to either the triumph of Ahura Mazda or the strengthening of Ingrammenu's destructive forces. The emphasis was on living a life of good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. The spiritual journey was one of self-discipline and personal responsibility, aiming to align oneself with the divine order of the universe. Zoroastrianism was not just a religious practice but a way of life, deeply connected to the governance of the Persian Empire. The kings, such as Darius I and Xerxes I, were seen as the earthly representatives of Ahura Mazda, tasked with maintaining the order and purity of the empire. The king's role was not just political, it was also spiritual. Kings were expected to lead by example, ensuring that the moral order was maintained and that their subjects adhered to the principles of Zoroastrianism. While Roman religion was often concerned with the external rituals and the appeasing of a vast number of gods, Zoroastrianism focused more on the inner moral and spiritual life of the individual. The struggle between good and evil was not just cosmic but intensely personal. Zoroastrians believed that each individual had a role to play in the ongoing battle between light and darkness, and this belief imbued Persian society with a sense of personal responsibility that was less present in Roman religion. The Zoroastrian view of the world was more philosophical and introspective, encouraging personal reflection on one's actions and their impact on the world. While the Romans believed that the gods were part of the fabric of daily life, Zoroastrianism presented a more abstract concept of the divine, one that was focused on a cosmic struggle between good and evil, order and chaos. The gods in Roman religion were more like human figures, while Ahura Mazda in Zoroastrianism was an all-powerful, benevolent god, with no rivals in his moral authority. The role of Zoroastrian priests was also different from that of Roman priests. In Rome, the priests performed rituals and sacrifices, acting as intermediaries between the people and the gods. In Persia, the Zoroastrian priests were seen as guardians of truth and morality, guiding the people in their struggle against evil. The influence of religion on both empires was profound, but the focus of each system was different. Roman religion was concerned with maintaining the favor of the gods to ensure the success of the empire, while Zoroastrianism emphasized moral conduct, personal responsibility, and the alignment of individuals with the divine cosmic order. Both belief systems played essential roles in the governance of their respective empires, shaping not only the political landscape but the daily lives of the people. In reflecting on the differences between Roman gods and Persian Zoroastrianism, we see two civilizations with very different approaches to the divine. Roman religion was more focused on ritual and the maintenance of social order through the appeasing of gods, while Zoroastrianism was centered on the moral struggle of the individual against evil, placing more emphasis on the internal transformation of the soul. As we continue to explore the monumental contrasts between Rome and Persia, let's turn our attention to two symbols of the grandeur and power of these empires: the Roman Colosseum and the Persian palaces. These structures not only reflect the architectural achievements of their respective civilizations but also offer insight into the values, priorities, and methods of governance that define both the Roman and Persian worlds. Imagine yourself stepping into the heart of Rome, the bustling capital of an empire that stretched across 3 continents. The Colosseum, standing tall and proud in the city's center, is a marvel of engineering and design. You hear the distant echo of a roaring crowd, the clattering of gladiators' armor, and the cries of excitement as they prepare for a deadly combat. The air is filled with tension as people of all social strata, patricians, plebeians, and slaves alike, gather to witness the spectacle. For the Romans, the Colosseum was not just a place of entertainment. It was a symbol of the empire's power, control, and the relationship between the state and its people. The Colosseum, or the Flavian Amphitheater, was built to host grand public games, gladiator fights, animal hunts, mock naval battles, and even executions. These events were not merely for the enjoyment of the people but also served to demonstrate the power of the emperor. The scale of the Colosseum itself, with its capacity to hold tens of thousands of spectators, reflects the importance of public entertainment in Roman society. This was a form of mass communication, where the emperor could display his strength and generosity, keeping the masses content and loyal. The games were an essential part of Roman culture, reflecting the empire's obsession with power, control, and spectacle. Now, imagine shifting your gaze eastward to the majestic Persian Empire. Far from the bustling urban centers of Rome, the palaces of Persia, such as those in Persepolis, rise in the heart of the empire, surrounded by vast desert landscapes. Unlike the Colosseum, which was built to entertain the public, Persian palaces were built to symbolize the divine right of kings and the magnificence of the empire. The palaces were awe-inspiring, adorned with intricate stone carvings, towering columns, and magnificent gateways, showcasing the wealth and cultural richness of Persia. The palace was a place not for public entertainment, but for the royal family and their closest allies, a space where diplomacy, power, and divine authority were reinforced. Within the walls of the Persian palaces, you can almost feel the presence of the king, surrounded by his courtiers and advisors. The air is thick with the scent of incense, and the sound of the courtiers' soft voices fills the halls. The kings of Persia, such as Darius I and Xerxes I, used their palaces as a visual representation of their power and divine right to rule. The grandeur of the architecture, with its immense stone reliefs depicting the king's victories and his relationship with the gods, was a direct reflection of the king's role as both a political leader and a divine figure. Unlike Rome, where public spectacles were used to maintain the loyalty of the people, Persian palaces were designed to reinforce the monarch's supreme authority and divine connection. The contrast between the Colosseum and Persian palaces is striking. The Roman Colosseum was a symbol of Roman public life, built for the people and used to entertain and control the masses. It was a place where power was displayed through brutal spectacles, meant to show the might of the emperor and the empire. The Persian palaces, on the other hand, were spaces of royal luxury and divine rule, built to reflect the grandeur of the monarchy and to reaffirm the king's authority. While the Colosseum was a space for the public to witness the power of Rome, Persian palaces were reserved for the elite, serving as the backdrop for the royal court and the center of the empire's political and spiritual life. Despite these differences, both the Colosseum and Persian palaces played critical roles in shaping the image of their respective empires. The Colosseum served as a tool for political control and public appeasement, while the Persian palaces were symbols of divine right and royal authority. Both were impressive feats of architecture and engineering, designed to convey power and to establish the ruler's legitimacy. As we move away from these grand structures, imagine the shifting sounds, the roar of the Roman crowd fading into the quiet, echoing halls of the Persian palace. The contrast between the public spectacle of the Colosseum and the royal grandeur of the Persian palaces reveals much about the values of each empire. Rome, ever focused on the people and the power of the state, used public entertainment to maintain order and loyalty. Persia, in contrast, emphasized the divine right of kings, using royal architecture to communicate the authority of the monarch and the eternal nature of the empire. Both structures remain, even in their ruins, as powerful symbols of their civilizations, one representing the spectacle of power and the other representing the divine authority of the rulers. As we step deeper into the fabric of Roman and Persian society, we now explore the fundamental systems that govern both empires, Roman law and Persian governance. These systems were not only essential for maintaining order, but they also reflected the philosophical and cultural values of each civilization. Imagine yourself in ancient Rome, where the streets are lined with monumental buildings and the air carries the sounds of political debate. Here, law is everything. The concept of law, as we know it today, owes much to Roman legal principles, which have shaped legal systems across the world. The Roman approach to governance was rooted in an intricate legal framework, ensuring that the empire was held together by a sense of order and justice. Roman law was built on the idea of just civil, or civil law, a system that applied to Roman citizens and was essential to the functioning of the empire. Imagine walking through the bustling Roman Forum, where debates and discussions are taking place about the latest legal reforms. Roman law, with its emphasis on fairness and justice, was designed to govern all aspects of life, from property disputes to criminal offenses. Roman citizens had the right to seek legal recourse, and the system was designed to be as transparent as possible. The 12 Tables, written around the 5th century BC, were the first codified laws of Rome, and they laid the foundation for a legal system that prioritized equality before the law. The most famous legal code in Roman history, the Corpus Juris Civilis, compiled by Emperor Justinian in the 6th century CE, became the foundation for much of modern European law. The key feature of Roman law was its adaptability. It allowed for the integration of new territories into the empire by establishing a system that could be applied universally. Whether in Gaul, Egypt, or Asia Minor, Roman law provided a sense of stability and unity across vast and diverse regions. Imagine yourself in a Roman court, where you, as a citizen, have the right to present your case and seek justice. This sense of legal protection was one of the pillars that allowed Rome to thrive for centuries. Roman law was also rooted in the principle that the law should apply equally to all citizens, regardless of their social standing. While the law was not perfect, slaves, for instance, had few rights. The idea of legal equality formed the backbone of the Roman system. The concept of innocent until proven guilty, the rights of defense, and the importance of legal precedents were all part of the Roman legal tradition. Roman law was not just about maintaining order, it was about creating a system that could adapt, evolve, and integrate new people and territories into the empire. In contrast, let us now turn our focus eastward to the Persian Empire, where governance was deeply intertwined with the king's divine authority and the need to maintain control over a vast and diverse empire. Persian governance was structured around the principle of satrapies, provinces governed by local rulers, known as satraps, who were appointed by the king. Imagine yourself as a satrap, overseeing a distant region of the Persian Empire. The satraps were not just administrators. They were also the military commanders and the chief representatives of the king in their territories. Their power was vast, but it was also checked by the need to maintain the king's favor and to manage relationships with local elites. The Persian system of governance was more decentralized than that of Rome. While Roman law was universal, applying to all citizens regardless of where they lived within the empire, Persian governance was tailored to the diverse cultures and peoples that made up the empire. The Persian kings were keenly aware that their empire stretched over vast lands, and they needed to balance centralized authority with local autonomy. The satraps were given significant powers to manage their regions, collect taxes, maintain order, and raise armies. However, their power was not absolute. The king retained ultimate authority, and satraps were often checked by royal inspectors, known as the royal eyes, who were sent by the king to monitor the administration of the provinces. Imagine yourself in the royal courts of Persia, where the king holds absolute power, but the governance of his empire is decentralized and dependent on the loyalty of the satraps. The king's role was not only as a ruler but also as a divine figure, chosen by the gods to rule the earth. This divine connection was a central feature of Persian governance, and it shaped the way the Persian kings ruled. They were seen as the guardians of order, tasked with ensuring that the moral and cosmic order of the world was maintained. This belief in the king's divine right to rule reinforced the authority of the Persian monarchy, and gave the king a unique position in both political and religious spheres. While the Roman legal system was focused on ensuring the rights and responsibilities of citizens, the Persian system of governance was centered on the king's divine authority and the loyalty of local rulers. The Roman system was based on laws that applied to all citizens and could be enforced universally across the empire, while the Persian system allowed for a more flexible approach, with local satraps exercising power in their regions but always under the watchful eye of the king. The contrast between Roman law and Persian governance highlights the different ways in which these two empires maintained control over vast territories. Roman law was a unifying force, ensuring that all citizens, regardless of location or status, were subject to the same legal framework. Persian governance, on the other hand, was more decentralized, relying on local rulers to manage the affairs of the provinces while still maintaining the king's ultimate authority. Both systems were effective in their own ways, but they reflect the unique priorities and structures of their respective empires. As you imagine the vast expanse of the Roman Empire, with its legal system providing structure and unity, and the Persian Empire, with its decentralized but still powerful system of governance, you can begin to understand how these two empires maintained order in their worlds. Rome's system of law was designed to integrate new territories into a single framework, while Persia's system of governance focused on balancing central authority with local autonomy. As we journey deeper into the essence of both the Roman and Persian empires, we now arrive at a comparison of their cultural legacies, specifically, their artistic contributions. Art is often the soul of a civilization, reflecting its values, beliefs, and societal priorities. Both Rome and Persia left behind extraordinary artistic traditions, but the nature of their art reveals much about their contrasting approaches to beauty, power, and legacy. Imagine standing amidst these two artistic worlds, Roman realism, with its statues of emperors and intricate mosaics, and Persian grandeur, with its towering palace reliefs and exquisite craftsmanship. Let's begin by stepping into ancient Rome, where art was seen as a vehicle for political propaganda, cultural identity, and the preservation of Roman achievements. Imagine walking through the marble halls of a Roman villa, your eyes falling upon lifelike busts of the emperors. The Romans were masters of portraiture, capturing not just the physical features of their subjects, but also their character, power, and status. These busts, often commissioned by the emperor or his family, served as reminders of the ruler's authority, divine favor, and the strength of the Roman state. The very act of creating such detailed and realistic sculptures reflected Rome's emphasis on individualism, social hierarchy, and the perpetuation of Roman ideals. Roman art was deeply rooted in realism. Roman sculptures, unlike the idealized forms of Greek art, often focused on the imperfections and age of the human body, emphasizing the power of experience, wisdom, and authority. Imagine the texture of the marble, the finely carved details of wrinkles, the furrowed brows, and the sharp lines of jawbones. These sculptures were not just aesthetic creations, they were tools of political messaging. They told the story of the emperor's divine right to rule, his connection to Rome's great past, and the continuation of Roman power across generations. The famous bust of Julius Caesar, for instance, shows him with a furrowed brow, indicating his seriousness and authority, while the statues of Augustus present him as youthful and divine, symbols of Rome's strength and prosperity under his rule. But Roman art was not limited to sculpture alone. The Romans also excelled in the creation of detailed frescoes, mosaics, and decorative objects. Picture the intricate mosaics that adorned the floors of Roman villas, each tile meticulously arranged to create scenes of mythology, daily life, and triumph. These mosaics were not just decorative, they were a reflection of the wealth and social standing of the owner. Roman art, in many ways, was a means to showcase status and power. Public buildings like the Roman Forum were adorned with statues and reliefs celebrating military victories, depicting scenes of Roman triumphs and the might of the emperor's rule. The Colosseum itself, while an arena for combat, also served as a canvas for Roman art, with sculptures and architectural designs that highlighted Roman military prowess. Now, imagine stepping into the ancient Persian palaces, where the art is less focused on individualism and more on the grandeur and divinity of the monarchy. Persian art, particularly during the Achaemenid period, was a reflection of the divine authority of the king. The palace walls of Persepolis are covered in detailed reliefs, showing the king receiving tribute from various peoples of the empire, elaborate depictions of foreign dignitaries presenting gifts, accompanied by intricate patterns and symbols of divine order. These reliefs were not just decorative, they were meant to convey the power and authority of the king as the representative of Ahura Mazda, the supreme god in Zoroastrianism. Every scene depicted in Persian art reinforced the idea of the king's divine right to rule, and these artworks were designed to remind the people of the king's connection to the divine order of the universe. Unlike Roman art, which often focused on realism and individual achievement, Persian art was deeply symbolic. The kings were depicted not as individuals, but as divine figures, often surrounded by symbols of power, tall, imposing figures that reflected the strength and majesty of the monarch. The reliefs in Persepolis show the king in a position of dominance, receiving offerings from conquered peoples, his image towering over the figures of foreigners. Persian art was grand, designed to evoke awe and reinforce the idea of the king as a ruler chosen by the gods. The motifs of winged figures and divine symbols in Persian art were a constant reminder of the empire's divine favor and the king's role in maintaining cosmic order. In terms of craftsmanship, Persian art was known for its intricate designs and the use of precious materials. Persian carpets, for instance, became famous for their beauty and complexity. The delicate patterns and vivid colors that adorned these carpets were not just decorative, they were a reflection of the empire's wealth and cultural richness. Persian art, like its architecture, was focused on grandeur and the divine, often using intricate detail and rich symbolism to convey messages of royal authority and spiritual power. While Roman art focused more on realism and individual achievements, Persian art celebrated the divine right of kings and the grandeur of the empire. Roman art was often a tool for political propaganda, reflecting the personal power of emperors and the military might of the Roman legions. In contrast, Persian art was more symbolic, representing the divine nature of the monarchy and the vast, unifying power of the Persian Empire. Both artistic traditions were influential, yet they reflect very different priorities. Rome sought to capture the human experience and individual power, while Persia sought to represent the divine and cosmic order through the king. The differences between Roman and Persian art reveal the contrasting values of the two civilizations. Roman art was more focused on the individual and the material world, showcasing the achievements of emperors and the glory of Roman military might. Persian art, on the other hand, was more focused on the divine and the eternal, emphasizing the king's connection to the gods and his role in maintaining cosmic order. While both empires used art to project power and influence, they did so in ways that reflected their unique cultural and spiritual values. As we continue our journey through the Roman and Persian empires, let us now explore the heart of their economic systems, their trade networks and economic strategies. Both Rome and Persia, despite their differences in governance and cultural values, relied heavily on trade to sustain their vast empires. Yet, the methods they employed, the goods they traded, and the impact of these systems on their societies reveal much about the priorities of each civilization. Picture yourself standing on the bustling streets of Rome's marketplaces, surrounded by merchants hawking their goods from every corner of the empire. Or imagine yourself traveling along the ancient trade routes of Persia, where the scent of spices, textiles, and rare commodities fills the air. Let us first consider the economic system of Rome. The Roman Empire, with its vast network of roads, cities, and ports, was a global economic powerhouse in the ancient world. Rome's economy was primarily based on agriculture, but trade played a critical role in supporting both the urban and rural populations. The Roman road network, stretching across the empire, was vital to facilitating the movement of goods, soldiers, and information. Imagine yourself traveling along the Via Appia, one of the most famous Roman roads, as goods from distant corners of the empire, grain from Egypt, wine from Gaul, and olive oil from Spain, are transported to the heart of the empire. The Roman Empire's economy was not just regional. It was interconnected, drawing on the resources and products of its vast territories. Roman trade was facilitated by a standardized system of currency. The use of Roman coins, such as the silver denarius, was widespread throughout the empire, creating a unified economic system that allowed for the smooth exchange of goods. The Romans traded extensively with their neighbors and beyond. The Mediterranean was a vital trade route, connecting the empire with Africa, Asia, and Europe. From the ports of Alexandria and Carthage, ships carried goods across the sea, reaching as far as India and China. Spices, silk, and precious metals flowed into Rome, while Roman goods, including wine, pottery, and glassware, were exported throughout the empire and beyond. Rome also benefited from the wealth of its provinces. Egypt, with its fertile lands, supplied grain to feed the Roman population, while Gaul provided wine and metalwork. The wealth generated from trade and agriculture fueled the construction of Roman infrastructure, roads, aqueducts, baths, and temples. The abundance of resources allowed Rome to maintain its military and political power, ensuring that the empire could continue to expand and sustain its dominance. However, the Roman economy was not without its problems. Despite the wealth generated from trade, economic inequality was a significant issue. The concentration of wealth in the hands of a few, combined with the exploitation of slaves in agriculture and industry, meant that many Romans lived in poverty. Furthermore, the reliance on slave labor, while boosting the economy, created social unrest and instability. These tensions were often exacerbated by inflation and the debasement of currency, which weakened the Roman economy during the later years of the empire. Now, imagine yourself traveling east to the Persian Empire, where trade and economy also played a central role in the empire's prosperity. Persia's vast territory, stretching from the steppes of Central Asia to the deserts of the Middle East, was rich in natural resources and key trade routes. The Persian economy, like Rome's, was based on agriculture, but Persia's strategic location between Europe and Asia allowed it to serve as a hub for trade, connecting the East and West. The famous Royal Road, which stretched from Susa in Persia to Sardis in Lydia, was an essential trade route that facilitated the exchange of goods across the empire. Persian trade was characterized by the exchange of luxury goods such as textiles, carpets, and precious metals. Persia was known for its exquisite craftsmanship in these areas, and Persian merchants traded goods as far as India, China, and the Mediterranean. Spices, silk, and ivory came from the east, while Persian-made products like carpets and fine cloth were highly prized. Persian cities, such as Persepolis and Susa, were thriving centers of commerce, where goods from all corners of the empire were exchanged. Picture the bustling markets of Persepolis, where merchants and traders barter in the shade of the Grand Palace, surrounded by the smells of exotic spices and the bright colors of fine silk. The Persian economy was also bolstered by the tribute system. Satraps, the provincial governors of the empire, were responsible for collecting tribute from the local populations and sending it to the central government. These tributes often consisted of agricultural produce, luxury items, and military resources. The wealth generated through this system helped maintain the lavish lifestyles of the Persian kings and their courts. However, the Persian economy, much like Rome's, faced challenges. The decentralized nature of Persian governance, with power divided between the king and the satraps, sometimes led to inefficiencies in the collection of tribute and the distribution of resources. Additionally, Persia's vast size and diverse population made it difficult to maintain uniform economic policies across the empire. While trade flourished in some regions, other areas of the empire, particularly those on the outskirts of the empire, often faced economic hardship and instability. The reliance on tribute from the satraps also created tension, as local elites sometimes resisted the central authority of the king. Both the Roman and Persian economies were based on trade and agriculture, yet the ways in which they operated were shaped by their respective empires' structures. Rome's economy was more centralized, with a unified currency and extensive trade networks linking its provinces. The Roman Empire's ability to manage trade and resources allowed it to maintain its military and political dominance for centuries. In contrast, Persia's economy was more decentralized, relying on the tribute system and the wealth generated by its diverse provinces. While the Persian Empire's trade was highly profitable, the challenges of managing such a vast and diverse empire often limited its economic potential. Now that we've journeyed through the trade routes and economies of both the Roman and Persian empires, we turn our attention to one of the most enduring legacies of these civilizations: their remarkable public works. Both Rome and Persia built infrastructure that not only served practical purposes but also symbolized their power, organization, and vision for their empires. Imagine yourself standing on the banks of the Tiber River in Rome or in the midst of the grand palaces of Persepolis. What you see around you is the result of centuries of planning, labor, and vision. These public works, from roads and aqueducts to palaces and temples, were more than just functional. They were tools of imperial control, used to consolidate power and ensure the prosperity of the state. Let's begin with the Roman Empire, where public works were an essential aspect of both urban life and military expansion. The Romans were pioneers in engineering and construction, and their public works were designed not only to serve the people but to demonstrate the might and sophistication of the empire. Imagine walking through the streets of Rome, where the pavement beneath your feet is part of a massive and highly organized system of roads and bridges that connected the farthest reaches of the empire. Roman roads were legendary for their durability, with the famous saying, "All roads lead to Rome," reflecting the empire's vast infrastructure network. These roads were not just paths for travelers. They were vital for the movement of Roman legions, trade goods, and communication across the empire. The Roman aqueducts are another example of their engineering genius. Imagine standing by one of these remarkable structures as it carries fresh water from distant springs into the heart of the city. The aqueducts allowed Rome to grow into a thriving metropolis, supplying its citizens with water for drinking, bathing, and irrigation. These grandiose structures, often stretching for miles, were marvels of precision engineering. The water they carried fed the empire's vast population and allowed Roman cities to thrive, even in areas far from natural water sources. The famous Aqua Appia, the first Roman aqueduct, is just one example of how the Romans brought water to their cities, transforming their urban environment. In addition to roads and aqueducts, the Romans built impressive public buildings like the Colosseum, the Baths of Caracalla, and the Pantheon. These structures were not merely functional but were symbols of Roman wealth, power, and sophistication. The Colosseum, for instance, served as a space for public entertainment, where gladiatorial games and other spectacles were held to keep the masses entertained and loyal to the empire. The Baths of Caracalla, with their grand halls, pools, and gardens, were not just places for bathing but also for socializing and relaxing, offering a glimpse into Roman leisure and cultural life. These buildings were part of a broader vision to maintain the cohesion of Roman society by providing spaces for both practical use and cultural expression. Now let's imagine the world of the Persian Empire, where the grand public works also reflected the power and divine right of the kings. Persian kings, particularly during the Achaemenid period, undertook ambitious projects that showcased the wealth, authority, and grandeur of their empire. One of the most iconic examples of Persian public works is the palaces at Persepolis. The palace complex was a magnificent testament to the wealth and power of the Persian monarchy, with its towering columns, intricate carvings, and vast courtyards. The reliefs on the walls of Persepolis depict scenes of the king receiving tribute from the peoples of the empire, emphasizing the king's divine right to rule over a vast and diverse world. The palaces were not just places of royal residence, they were symbols of the empire's unity and the king's divine authority. The Persian Empire also built extensive roads, including the famous Royal Road, which stretched from Susa in Persia to Sardis in Lydia, covering over 1,500 miles. Imagine traveling along this road, where you would encounter stations with fresh horses and supplies, ensuring that the Persian messengers and officials could travel quickly and efficiently across the empire. The Royal Road was a critical part of the Persian administrative system, allowing the king to communicate with his satraps and officials across vast distances. This road system was not just about trade or military movement. It was a key component of Persia's centralized governance, enabling the king to maintain control over his far-flung territories. In addition to the Royal Road, the Persians also built qanats, an ingenious system of underground canals used to transport water from the mountains to the desert plains. These qanats were vital for agriculture and city life, particularly in the arid regions of Persia. Imagine the cool, still air as you walk alongside one of these underground waterways, marveling at the engineering skill required to create such a system in an environment with limited access to water. The qanats helped to irrigate the land, allowing agriculture to thrive in otherwise inhospitable regions. While Roman public works were often focused on the needs of the urban population and the military, Persian public works were more centered around showcasing the power and authority of the king, as well as maintaining the empire's vast infrastructure. Both civilizations understood the importance of public works in maintaining control over their empires, but their approaches reflected their different priorities. Roman public works were designed to integrate the farthest corners of the empire into a single, functioning system, while Persian public works were more focused on reinforcing the divine right of the king and facilitating the movement of goods and information across the empire. The legacy of Roman public works can be seen in the infrastructure of modern cities, where roads, aqueducts, and public buildings continue to shape urban life. The grandeur of Persian public works, particularly the palaces and roads, continues to evoke awe and admiration, symbolizing the empire's vastness and the divine authority of its rulers. Both Rome and Persia understood that their strength lay not just in their military prowess but in their ability to create lasting and functional public works that would serve their societies for centuries to come. As we continue our journey through the Roman and Persian empires, we now turn to the realm of education. Education was crucial in shaping the citizens, soldiers, and leaders of both civilizations. However, the approach to education in Rome and Persia was distinct, reflecting the values and needs of each empire. Roman education, with its focus on oratory, rhetoric, and civic duty, was designed to prepare individuals for participation in the political and military life of the empire. Persian education, while also deeply rooted in royal ideology and governance, had a more spiritual and philosophical foundation, particularly for the elite and royal families. Let us now explore how these two great empires shaped the minds of their people. Imagine yourself in the heart of ancient Rome, where education was seen as a public duty and a means of strengthening the empire. For Roman citizens, particularly those in the upper classes, education was essential not only for personal development but also for participation in the state's political and military systems. Roman education was often centered around the study of rhetoric, philosophy, and law, subjects that were designed to prepare young men for careers in the Senate, the military, and other positions of power. Imagine the bustling Roman schools, where children of the elite were taught by rhetoricians, who guided them in mastering the art of speaking persuasively and defending their views in public debates. Oratory was considered one of the most important skills in Roman society, as it enabled individuals to influence public opinion, secure political alliances, and lead in times of war. Roman education began in the home, where the father was the primary teacher. Children, particularly boys, would learn the basics of reading, writing, and arithmetic from their parents or tutors. As they grew older, they would attend schools where they would learn more advanced subjects, including grammar, rhetoric, and philosophy. The ludus was the elementary school, where children would be taught the basics, while the grammaticus and reader were the advanced schools that focused on grammar, literature, and public speaking. These subjects were seen as essential for preparing young men to take part in the public life of Rome. For Roman women, education was more limited. While some upper-class Roman women received education in reading, writing, and music, their education was primarily focused on domestic skills, including managing the household and overseeing family matters. Roman women were not expected to participate in the political or military spheres, and as a result, their education reflected the societal expectations placed upon them. Still, some women, particularly from the elite, were educated in philosophy and literature, although this was less common. In contrast, let's turn our focus to the education system in Persia, which was centered on the royal court and the training of future leaders. The Persian education system, particularly for those in the royal family and elite circles, was deeply influenced by Zoroastrianism and the divine right of kings. Imagine yourself in the royal courts of Persepolis, where the future rulers of Persia are being educated in the arts of governance, military strategy, and religious philosophy. Persian education was designed to prepare individuals for leadership roles within the empire, with a strong emphasis on moral conduct, justice, and maintaining the cosmic order. Zoroastrianism, with its dualistic worldview, shaped the educational philosophy, encouraging the study of wisdom, ethics, and the pursuit of truth. The education of Persian princes and nobles was centered around the royal courts and temples, where priests and scholars would teach the young elite the principles of governance, military strategy, and religious duties. Royal children were taught not only the arts of war and administration but also the sacred texts of Zoroastrianism, which emphasized the importance of moral behavior, truth, and the fight against evil. The teachings of Zoroaster, the founder of Zoroastrianism, were central to Persian education, and the understanding of justice, righteousness, and the cosmic struggle between good and evil played a significant role in shaping the leaders of the empire. Unlike Roman education, which was focused on rhetoric and public speaking, Persian education emphasized philosophy, religion, and governance. The Persian kings were seen as divinely appointed, and their education was rooted in the understanding of their responsibility to maintain order and justice in the empire. Persian education also placed a high value on the training of military commanders, as Persia's vast empire required strong and capable leaders to manage its diverse territories and defend against external threats. For women in Persia, education was more restricted than for men, but royal women, particularly those in the royal family, could receive instruction in governance, diplomacy, and philosophy. The role of women in Persian education was often centered around managing the household, supporting the king, and representing the royal family in diplomatic matters. However, some women in the royal courts held significant influence, and were involved in the intellectual and political life of the empire. While Roman education was primarily focused on preparing individuals for participation in public life and the military, Persian education was more oriented toward preparing the elite to govern justly and maintain the moral order of the empire. Both education systems placed importance on the development of leadership, but they did so in ways that reflected the differing political and religious values of their societies. Roman education, with its emphasis on rhetoric and law, was designed to produce citizens capable of participating in the civic life of the empire, while Persian education, with its focus on ethics and divine rule, was intended to produce rulers who would uphold the cosmic order and protect the empire from chaos. The legacy of Roman education can still be seen in modern legal and political systems, particularly in the Western world, where the study of law, rhetoric, and public speaking continues to be central to the education of future leaders. As we reflect on the contrasting educational systems of Rome and Persia, imagine walking through the halls of a Roman school, where the voices of young students echo as they learn the art of persuasion, or sitting in a Persian court, where the future leaders of the empire are taught the wisdom of Zoroastrianism, preparing to rule with justice and divine authority. As we approach the final chapters of our exploration into the Roman and Persian empires, we turn to one of the most poignant aspects of these civilizations: their eventual decline and fall. No empire lasts forever, and while both Rome and Persia once spanned vast territories and influenced much of the ancient world, their fates diverged. In this segment, we will examine the complex factors that led to the fall of these great empires, considering the internal struggles, external pressures, and the larger historical forces at play. While Rome's fall came in stages, beginning with political instability and culminating in the sack of the city, Persia's decline was marked by a series of military defeats, internal divisions, and external invasions. Imagine yourself standing in the center of Rome at its height, the city brimming with life and activity. The Colosseum echoes with the roar of the crowd, the streets bustle with commerce, and the power of the Roman legions seems invincible. However, behind this grandeur, cracks were beginning to appear. The Roman Empire, like any great civilization, was not immune to internal strife. The political system, once rooted in the Senate and the principles of the Republic, had become increasingly unstable with the rise of military dictatorships and emperors who wielded absolute power. By the 3rd century CE, Rome faced a series of crises: economic instability, political corruption, military defeats, and the rise of competing factions within the empire. The once proud and powerful Roman legions found themselves spread thin across a vast and overextended empire. The Roman Empire's decline was not a single event but a gradual process. The division of the empire into the Western and Eastern Roman empires in 395 CE was one of the key factors that weakened the West. The Eastern Roman Empire, known as the Byzantine Empire, continued to thrive for nearly another 1,000 years, but the Western Roman Empire became increasingly fragmented and vulnerable to external attacks. The invasions of various barbarian tribes, such as the Visigoths, Vandals, and Ostrogoths, put immense pressure on the Western Empire. In 410 CE, the Visigoths sacked Rome, a symbolic event that signaled the beginning of the end. But it was the final blow in 476 CE, when the last Roman emperor of the West, Romulus Augustulus, was overthrown by the barbarian leader Odoacer, that marked the official fall of the Western Roman Empire. The causes of Rome's fall were multifaceted. There was internal corruption, economic decline, and a reliance on slave labor that hindered technological innovation. The empire's size became a liability, making it increasingly difficult to govern effectively. Moreover, Rome's political instability, marked by frequent changes in leadership, assassinations, and civil wars, undermined the empire's ability to respond to external threats. Rome's military might, once its greatest strength, became a double-edged sword, as the empire increasingly relied on mercenaries and non-Roman soldiers, which undermined its cohesion and loyalty to the Roman state. Now, imagine stepping into the heart of Persia, a civilization that stretched from the Indus Valley in the east to Egypt in the west. The Achaemenid Empire, founded by Cyrus the Great, was one of the most impressive and enduring empires of the ancient world. Yet, like Rome, Persia too faced pressures from within and without. The internal struggles of the Persian Empire, particularly during the later Achaemenid period, contributed to its vulnerability. The system of satrapies, though a key element of Persia's success, also created divisions within the empire. Local satraps, often with their own armies and resources, held considerable power, which sometimes led to conflicts and instability. Externally, the Persian Empire faced significant challenges from the Greek city-states. The Greco-Persian Wars, which included the famous battles of Marathon, Thermopylae, and Salamis, saw the Persian Empire struggle to subdue Greece, a challenge that drained resources and shifted the balance of power in the region. However, it was not Greece that ultimately brought about Persia's downfall. Instead, it was the rise of Alexander the Great, who led the Macedonian Empire to victory over Persia in the 4th century BC. In 330 BC, Alexander's forces captured the Persian capital of Persepolis, symbolizing the fall of the Achaemenid Empire. The death of Darius III, the last Persian king of the Achaemenid dynasty, marked the end of Persian rule, and the empire was absorbed into Alexander's expanding empire. The fall of Persia was also influenced by its internal weaknesses. As the empire expanded, it became increasingly difficult to manage such a vast and diverse territory. The ruling elite, the Persian nobility, often clashed with the royal family, and there were constant struggles for power within the palace. This fragmentation made it easier for external invaders to take advantage of Persia's internal instability. Alexander's conquest of Persia was not just a military victory. It was a culmination of years of internal division, weak leadership, and growing discontent among the Persian people and nobility. Unlike Rome, which faced a slow and steady decline over several centuries, Persia's fall was more sudden, marked by the swift and decisive military campaign of Alexander. However, both empires shared similar struggles: overexpansion, internal divisions, and the difficulty of maintaining control over vast and diverse territories. Rome's eventual fall was more gradual, but its decline was just as inevitable as Persia's. The Roman Empire's ability to hold on for so long was largely due to its capacity for adaptation. Its legal systems, infrastructure, and military prowess allowed it to survive longer than most empires. In contrast, Persia, though formidable at its height, struggled with internal fragmentation and external pressures that led to its relatively swift collapse. The legacy of both empires lives on, however, in the art, architecture, and ideas they left behind. While Rome's political and legal systems have shaped much of the Western world, Persia's cultural contributions, its art, architecture, and influence on later empires, continue to be celebrated. The fall of both empires serves as a reminder of the fragility of even the greatest civilizations and the complexities of sustaining power over long periods of time. As you reflect on the rise and fall of these two great empires, imagine the contrasts. Rome, a city that slowly crumbled under the weight of internal and external pressures, and Persia, a vast empire that fell almost overnight, its grandeur reduced to ruins by the conqueror's sword. As we continue our examination of the Roman and Persian empires, we now turn our attention to one of the most defining aspects of their existence: how each empire expanded and spread its influence across vast territories. Roman imperialism and Persian expansionism were both key to the success and legacy of these civilizations, yet their methods, motivations, and the outcomes of their expansions were quite different. The way in which each empire pursued territorial growth reveals much about their political ideologies, military strategies, and the societal values they sought to preserve. Imagine yourself in the heart of ancient Rome, standing before the Senate as the leaders of the empire discuss the next stage of their imperial ambitions. Roman imperialism was driven by the idea of spreading Roman law, culture, and governance. The Romans believed they were spreading civilization to the barbarian tribes of Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. Rome's expansion was not just about territorial conquest, it was about incorporating new lands into the Roman system, ensuring stability, and maintaining control over distant provinces. Rome's military campaigns were characterized by their organization, discipline, and strategic brilliance, making them highly effective in achieving their imperial goals. Roman imperialism was marked by the concept of Pax Romana, the Roman peace. This idealized vision of empire was not just about military control but also about the integration of conquered peoples into Roman society. Once a region was conquered, it was often granted Roman citizenship or allowed to retain its local customs and governance, as long as they adhered to Roman laws and paid tribute. Roman roads, aqueducts, and public works were built to solidify the empire's presence and ensure the smooth functioning of the newly integrated territories. The goal was to create a unified system across the empire, where each conquered province contributed to the greater Roman whole. Roman imperialism, however, was not without its flaws. While the Romans sought to assimilate their conquered peoples, this did not mean equality for all. Citizens of Rome enjoyed the benefits of the empire, including access to legal rights, military service, and political representation. However, non-Romans often faced discrimination, with limited rights and less power. Roman imperialism was also marked by a constant need to expand and conquer new territories, leading to overextension and eventually contributing to the empire's decline. Despite this, Roman imperialism left a profound legacy, including the spread of Roman law, architecture, and governance, which influenced much of Europe for centuries to come. Now let's shift our focus eastward to the Persian Empire, where expansion was driven by a different set of motivations. Persian expansionism, particularly under the Achaemenid dynasty, was rooted in the vision of the king as a divinely appointed ruler, tasked with bringing order to the world. The Persian kings, such as Cyrus the Great and Darius I, pursued expansion not just for territorial gain but to unify the vast and diverse peoples of the known world under their rule. Persia's approach to expansion was often less about direct control and more about creating a system of governance that allowed for local autonomy while ensuring loyalty to the king. Unlike Rome, which sought to assimilate conquered peoples into its cultural and legal system, Persia allowed much more local independence. The Persian Empire was divided into provinces, or satrapies, each ruled by a satrap, or governor. These satraps had significant power within their territories, but were still ultimately answerable to the king. The Persian system of governance was decentralized, allowing local customs, religions, and traditions to be maintained. Persia's expansion was less about imposing a uniform system on its subjects, and more about maintaining order and securing tribute from its vast territories. The royal road system and the creation of the Khanate irrigation systems were both tools of Persian imperialism, designed to maintain control over far-flung provinces and ensure the prosperity of the empire. Persian expansionism, while successful in its own right, faced significant challenges. The vastness of the empire made it difficult to maintain control over its provinces, and the reliance on local rulers sometimes led to tensions and power struggles within the empire. Unlike Rome, which developed a strong military presence in every province, Persia's reliance on the satraps sometimes meant that military and administrative power was fragmented. Despite this, Persia's ability to unite a vast and diverse empire through a combination of local autonomy and centralized royal authority was one of the key features of its expansion. The methods of Roman imperialism and Persian expansionism highlight the different ways these two civilizations viewed power and governance. Roman imperialism was driven by the desire to create a unified system of laws, culture, and governance across the empire. The Romans sought to assimilate conquered peoples into their system, providing infrastructure and legal rights in exchange for loyalty and tribute. Persian expansionism, on the other hand, was marked by a more pragmatic approach, allowing local customs and governance to remain in place while ensuring that the satraps and rulers remained loyal to the king. This system of decentralized control allowed Persia to manage its vast empire but also created opportunities for local elites to assert their independence. Despite their differences, both Roman imperialism and Persian expansionism were successful in building vast empires that influenced the course of history. Rome's military might, organizational skills, and legal system allowed it to create a lasting empire that lasted for centuries, even after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Persia's more flexible and decentralized approach allowed it to maintain control over a vast and diverse empire, bringing together peoples from different cultures and backgrounds under one rule. As you reflect on the contrasts between Roman imperialism and Persian expansionism, imagine yourself walking along the roads of Rome, where every step brings you closer to the heart of the empire, or traveling along the royal road of Persia, where the vast expanse of the empire unfolds before you. Both empires, through their imperialistic ambitions, left lasting legacies that shaped the world for centuries to come. The methods of their expansion, whether through military conquest or through the creation of systems of local governance, offer a window into the values and priorities that defined Rome and Persia. As we continue to explore the inner workings of these two great empires, we now turn our attention to the leaders who shaped their fates, the Roman emperors and Persian kings. The figure of the emperor in Rome and the king in Persia was central to the functioning of the empire. However, their leadership styles, the expectations of their roles, and the ways they were viewed by their subjects were quite different. Both were seen as the ultimate authority, but while Roman emperors were deeply entangled in the complex political machinery of the state, Persian kings were revered as divinely appointed figures, with a more direct connection to the divine order. Let's begin with Rome. The Roman emperor, a title that evolved over time, was a figure of immense power, but the path to imperial power was anything but smooth. The emperor was, in theory, the first citizen of Rome, princeps, but in practice, he was the absolute ruler of the empire. The emperor wielded control over the military, the legal system, and the political structure of Rome. However, the emperor's power was often limited by the Senate, the military, and the complex network of relationships within Roman society. The position of emperor was not hereditary at first. Emperors were often chosen by the Senate or the military, and the process of selection could be highly political and fraught with intrigue. The infamous Year of the Four Emperors, in 69 C, for example, illustrates the instability of imperial succession, with several claimants to the throne battling for control of Rome. Despite this, the role of the emperor was an essential part of Roman life. The emperor was responsible for maintaining peace and order within the empire, ensuring that the military was loyal, and overseeing the administration of the vast territories. The emperor was also seen as a divine figure, especially in the later stages of the empire, when emperors were deified after their death. The practice of imperial cult allowed emperors to be worshipped as gods, consolidating their power and reinforcing their authority. Some emperors, like Augustus, skillfully used their image and propaganda to present themselves as benevolent rulers, guiding the empire to prosperity, while others, like Nero, used their power in more reckless ways, leading to rebellion and dissent. Roman emperors were often in a delicate balance of power. While they had ultimate authority, they had to constantly navigate the interests of the Senate, the army, and the people. Political alliances, patronage, and military success were key to an emperor's reign. This constant negotiation for power often resulted in instability, with emperors being assassinated, overthrown, or replaced through military coups. Despite this, the Roman imperial system, with its complex political network, allowed for some level of continuity and stability, and the legacy of the emperor continues to influence the structure of modern political leadership. Now let's turn our gaze to Persia, where the king, particularly during the Achaemenid period, was not just a ruler but a divine figure. Persian kings, such as Cyrus the Great, Darius I, and Xerxes I, were believed to be appointed by Ahura Mazda, the supreme god of Zoroastrianism, to rule the earth. The Persian king was the central authority in the empire, with control over the military, administration, and religion. However, unlike the Roman emperor, the Persian king's power was deeply intertwined with the divine. Kingship in Persia was seen as a sacred duty, and the king was often referred to as the King of Kings, Shahanshah, a title that reflected his authority over not only the Persian Empire but also the vassal states and kingdoms within it. The Persian king was not only a political leader but also a religious figure. The king's legitimacy was based on his divine right to rule, and it was his responsibility to maintain cosmic order and ensure the prosperity of the empire. The king was expected to be just, wise, and benevolent, ruling with the authority of Ahura Mazda. The king's role was to protect the empire from chaos and maintain stability, which was reflected in the Persian legal system and the administration of the satrapies, provinces. The Persian kings were often depicted in royal reliefs, such as those at Persepolis, where they were shown receiving tribute from the peoples of the empire, reinforcing their divine right to rule and their role as the protector of all. Unlike Roman emperors, who often had to navigate a complex political structure of competing factions, the Persian king's authority was more centralized and absolute. The Persian system of government was built around the idea of a divine monarchy, and the king was the supreme ruler, with no formal checks on his power. The king's decisions were often seen as divinely inspired, and he was held to the highest standards of morality and justice. The king was not just a political leader but a spiritual figure, responsible for ensuring that the empire remained aligned with the divine order. This connection to the divine was crucial in maintaining the loyalty of the people and the stability of the empire. However, Persian kings were not immune to internal conflicts. While the monarchy was strong, the decentralized nature of the Persian Empire, with its satraps and local elites, sometimes led to tension between the royal family and regional powers. The king's power was dependent on the loyalty of the satraps, and there were instances of rebellion or disloyalty among the provincial governors. Despite this, the divine nature of the Persian monarchy meant that the king's position was not easily challenged. The legitimacy of the king was largely based on his ability to maintain order and uphold the divine principles of Zoroastrianism. The contrast between Roman emperors and Persian kings is striking. While both held immense power, Roman emperors had to navigate a complex political landscape and maintain the support of the military, the Senate, and the people. The emperor's legitimacy was based on his ability to maintain order and his military success. In contrast, the Persian king's power was rooted in his divine appointment, and his authority was seen as absolute. The Persian king's role was more centralized and spiritual, while the Roman emperor's role was more political and often subject to the shifting tides of Roman society and military politics. Despite these differences, both the Roman emperor and the Persian king played crucial roles in shaping the destinies of their respective empires. The emperor was the face of Roman imperialism, guiding the empire through wars, political intrigue, and expansion. As we continue to compare the inner workings of Roman and Persian governance, We now focus on two key institutions that shaped the political and social landscape of these empires: the Roman Senate and the Persian nobility. Both were powerful forces in their respective societies, but their structures, roles, and influence were quite different, reflecting the contrasting political ideologies of Rome and Persia. The Roman Senate was central to the political life of the Republic and early empire, serving as a check on the power of the emperor. In contrast, the Persian nobility, particularly the Azad class, played a crucial role in governance, but with a different kind of authority, often acting as regional powers within a more decentralized system of rule. Imagine yourself in ancient Rome, standing in the Forum, the beating heart of Roman political life. The Roman Senate, originally established during the Republic, was one of the oldest and most powerful institutions in the Roman state. Though the power of the Senate diminished with the rise of the emperors, it still held significant influence throughout much of the Roman Empire. Senators were not only the wealthiest and most respected members of society, they were also the political elite who played a key role in shaping Roman laws, policies, and decisions. The Senate's role was to advise the emperor, approve legislation, and provide a forum for political debate. While the emperor had ultimate authority, the Senate remained a powerful symbol of Rome's republican roots. The Roman Senate, especially during the early imperial period, was composed of aristocratic families who had a deep stake in maintaining the social order and the power of the Roman state. Senators were expected to uphold the values of Roman civic duty and to act as guardians of the Republic's traditions. While they often disagreed and engaged in political struggles, the Senate was a central body that allowed for some semblance of representative government, especially in the early days of the empire. However, with the consolidation of imperial power under Augustus and his successors, the role of the Senate shifted from being a key political force to more of an advisory body to the emperor. The emperor was seen as the ultimate authority, but his legitimacy often depended on maintaining the support of the Senate. Even as the Senate's power waned, it remained an important part of Roman political culture, a symbol of Roman aristocracy and the continuity of Roman governance. In contrast, let's shift our focus to Persia, where the role of the nobility was deeply intertwined with the power of the king. Persian nobility, particularly during the Achaemenid period, was not a single institution like the Senate, but a decentralized network of powerful families and local rulers who governed the empire's vast territories. The Persian Empire was divided into provinces, known as satrapies, each overseen by a satrap, or governor, who was often drawn from the noble class. These satraps held considerable power within their territories, managing the administration, the military, and the collection of tribute. The Persian nobility played a key role in the empire's governance, serving as intermediaries between the central authority of the king and the local populations. The satraps were appointed by the king but often had significant autonomy within their provinces. This decentralized system of governance allowed for flexibility in managing the diverse cultures and peoples within the Persian Empire. However, it also created challenges for the central authority of the king. The Persian king's power was dependent on the loyalty of the satraps, and there were times when the satraps, with their own armies and resources, would act independently of the king's wishes. In these moments, the nobility's power could challenge the king's authority, leading to tensions and conflicts within the empire. Despite the potential for conflict, the Persian nobility was crucial to maintaining the stability of the empire. The nobility, particularly the Azad class, were not just military commanders and administrators. They were also the guardians of Persian culture, religion, and tradition. Many members of the nobility were deeply involved in the practice of Zoroastrianism, the state religion, and played a role in maintaining the moral and spiritual order of the empire. The king, as the divine ruler, relied on the nobility to help maintain the cosmic order on earth, ensuring that justice and righteousness prevailed throughout the empire. The nobility's connection to the king's divine right to rule reinforced their power and influence in Persian society. The differences between the Roman Senate and the Persian nobility are striking. The Roman Senate was a political body that, while originally designed to represent the interests of the Roman people, eventually became an institution that advised and supported the emperor. The Senate was composed of aristocrats who, despite their power, were still subject to the authority of the emperor. The Persian nobility, on the other hand, was more decentralized, with satraps and local elites holding significant autonomy within their territories. The Persian king, while wielding ultimate authority, had to balance his power with the loyalty of the nobility, and the nobles themselves often exercised considerable influence over local affairs. In terms of governance, the Roman Senate represented a more centralized form of authority, with a singular emperor at the helm, while the Persian system was characterized by a balance between royal authority and local control. The Persian nobility had more power within their regions but were ultimately subordinate to the king, whose divine right to rule was seen as paramount. The Roman Senate, while initially a body that checked the power of the monarch, became more symbolic as imperial power consolidated. However, both institutions were critical to the functioning of their respective empires, with the Roman Senate serving as a forum for political life and the Persian nobility as the backbone of the empire's governance. Imagine yourself sitting in the grand halls of the Roman Senate, where senators argue fiercely over matters of state, or walking through the opulent courts of a Persian satrap, where local nobles discuss military strategy and administration. The contrast between the centralized power of Rome and the more flexible, decentralized system of Persia offers valuable insights into the nature of imperial rule. The Roman Senate, while gradually losing power, was a symbol of Rome's republican past, while the Persian nobility reflected the empire's need for balance between central authority and local governance. As we near the end of our journey through the contrasting worlds of Rome and Persia, we now reflect on the legacies of these two empires, their lasting influences on the world and their enduring cultural, political, and societal contributions. Though both empires eventually fell, their impact is still felt today, shaping everything from governance and law to architecture and art. Let us pause for a moment to reflect on how the Roman and Persian empires left indelible marks on the ancient world and continue to influence the modern world in ways we may not always fully realize. Let us first consider the legacy of the Roman Empire. The Romans, through their military conquests and imperial expansion, left behind a civilization that has shaped Western culture and governance for centuries. Imagine walking through the grand ruins of the Roman Forum, where the ideals of Roman law and politics were first conceived. The Roman Empire's legal system, particularly the codification of laws in the Corpus Juris Civilis, remains one of its most lasting contributions to the modern world. Roman law served as the foundation for many modern legal systems in Europe and beyond. The concepts of property rights, contract law, and even the idea of a trial by jury all have their roots in Roman legal practices. The 12 Tables, Rome's first written laws, provided a model of fairness and justice, which later influenced European legal codes. Rome's system of governance, too, has had a lasting impact. The Roman Senate and the political practices of the Roman Republic laid the groundwork for modern representative democracy. The concept of a republic, with elected officials and a system of checks and balances, inspired many political systems in the Western world, including the government of the United States. The structure of Roman law, political organization, and civic duty influenced the way we think about the state and individual rights. Beyond politics and law, Rome's architectural and engineering feats have shaped the built environment around the world. The Romans perfected the use of concrete, which allowed them to construct massive structures like the Colosseum, the Pantheon, and the Roman baths. Roman roads and aqueducts, some of which are still in use today, exemplify their engineering brilliance. The Romans not only created the infrastructure of their empire but also set the standard for future civilizations. Their cities were designed with a focus on practicality, beauty, and functionality, qualities that continue to influence urban planning to this day. Even in modern architecture, the Roman use of arches, vaults, and domes remains a standard feature in buildings across the globe. Culturally, the Romans also left a lasting imprint on art, literature, and philosophy. Roman art, influenced by the Greeks, emphasized realism and individual expression. Roman literature, including works by Virgil, Cicero, and Seneca, remains foundational to Western literature and philosophy. The Romans also passed down much of Greek philosophical thought, particularly through Stoicism and Epicureanism, which influenced later Western thinkers, including those during the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. Now, let's shift our focus to the Persian Empire and its own profound legacy. While Persia may not have influenced the Western world in the same way as Rome, it left a lasting imprint on the Middle East, Central Asia, and even parts of Europe. Imagine walking through the grand palaces of Persepolis, where the beauty of Persian art, culture, and architecture still resonates. Persia was a melting pot of various cultures and peoples, and the Persian Empire's approach to governance and religion had a far-reaching impact. Perhaps the most enduring contribution of the Persian Empire was its system of governance. The Persian kings, particularly Darius I and Xerxes I, developed a highly efficient administrative system that allowed them to govern a vast and diverse empire. The satrapy system, which divided the empire into provinces overseen by local governors, was a model for future empires, including those in the Islamic world. The Persian system of decentralized rule, where local rulers had some autonomy but were still loyal to the central authority of the king, influenced the way later empires managed large and diverse territories. Another key legacy of Persia was its religious system, Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism, one of the world's oldest monotheistic religions, had a profound influence on later religious systems, particularly Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The ideas of a single, all-powerful God, the struggle between good and evil, and the concept of a final judgment were all integral to Zoroastrian thought and can be seen in later religious traditions. Zoroastrianism's emphasis on morality, truth, and righteousness had a lasting impact on Persian rulers, who saw themselves as divine agents tasked with maintaining cosmic order. Persian art and architecture also left a significant mark on the ancient world. The reliefs and carvings at Persepolis, depicting the king receiving tribute from various peoples, symbolized the unity of the empire under the divine rule of the king. Persian art, with its intricate designs and rich symbolism, influenced the art of later empires, including those of the Islamic caliphates. Persian architecture, particularly the use of columns, arches, and large courtyards, set the standard for later architectural traditions in the Middle East and Central Asia. The Persian Empire also played a key role in the development of trade routes. The Royal Road, which stretched from Susa to Sardis, was a vital artery for commerce and communication between East and West. Persia's strategic location made it a crossroads for trade, and Persian merchants helped facilitate the exchange of goods, ideas, and cultures across vast distances. The Silk Road, which linked China to the Mediterranean, passed through Persian territory, further cementing Persia's role as a central hub of the ancient world's economic and cultural exchange. While the Roman Empire's legacy is more immediately apparent in Western civilization, Persia's influence is felt deeply in the Middle East, Central Asia, and the wider Islamic world. Persia's legacy of governance, religion, art, and trade continues to shape the region today, influencing everything from the political structures of modern Iran to the cultural practices of the Middle East. Both the Roman and Persian empires have left legacies that continue to influence the modern world. Rome's contributions to law, governance, architecture, and culture are deeply embedded in Western civilization, while Persia's legacy of governance, religion, art, and trade continues to shape the Middle East and Central Asia. As we draw the curtains on our deep dive into the contrasting worlds of Rome and Persia, we arrive at one final reflection: the lasting power of Rome versus the forgotten legacy of Persia. Despite the eventual fall of both empires, the influence of Rome has endured through the ages, shaping the modern world in ways both large and small. On the other hand, while the Persian Empire's direct power faded, its influence, particularly through its cultural and governance systems, remains deeply embedded in the regions that once fell under its control. These two empires, although vastly different in their decline and posthumous legacies, left indelible marks that continue to resonate today. Let's first reflect on the lasting power of Rome. The Roman Empire, though it crumbled in the West in 476 CE, left a legacy that still shapes Western civilization. Imagine yourself in modern Europe or the Americas, where the echoes of Roman law, architecture, and governance continue to guide societies. The Roman legal system, with its concepts of citizenship, the rule of law, and individual rights, has served as the foundation for many modern legal systems, including those in Europe, North America, and Latin America. The notion of legal equality before the law, the rights to a fair trial, and the importance of written codes, these Roman innovations still hold sway in courtrooms across the world. Roman architecture, too, has withstood the test of time. The use of arches, domes, and concrete in Roman structures influenced the development of Western architecture for centuries. Today, the world's grandest buildings, including many of Europe's cathedrals and government buildings, owe their design to Roman precedents. The Colosseum, the aqueducts, and the Pantheon, though weathered by time, remain symbols of the Roman Empire's engineering and architectural brilliance. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of Rome is its political and philosophical impact. The Roman Republic, with its system of checks and balances, its Senate, and its emphasis on civic participation, laid the groundwork for modern representative democracy. In fact, many aspects of Roman governance, such as the idea of a republic, the role of elected officials, and the importance of law and order, can be seen in the political systems of modern democracies. Even the United States, with its Constitution, the Electoral College, and the notion of a Senate, draws inspiration from the Roman Republic. Culturally, Rome's influence continues through its art, literature, and language. Latin, the language of the Romans, gave rise to the Romance languages, including Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, and Romanian. Roman literature, including works by Virgil, Cicero, and Ovid, laid the foundation for Western literary traditions. Roman art, with its focus on realism, portraiture, and public representation, influenced Western artistic expression for centuries. While the Roman Empire fell in the West, its legacy lives on. The Byzantine Empire, the eastern half of the Roman Empire, continued to thrive for another 1,000 years, preserving Roman law and culture in the form of Byzantine law and the preservation of classical texts. Moreover, the rise of Christianity, which took hold during the Roman Empire, helped carry Roman ideals into the medieval period and beyond. Now let's turn our attention to the Persian Empire, which, though it faded with the rise of Alexander the Great, left a legacy that, while less visible in the Western world, had a profound influence on the Middle East, Central Asia, and even Europe. Imagine walking through the bustling bazaars of modern-day Iran, where Persian culture and the legacy of the Achaemenid Empire still thrive. Persia's influence can be seen in the art, architecture, and governance of the regions that once fell under its rule. One of the most lasting contributions of the Persian Empire was its system of governance. The satrapy system, which divided the empire into provinces ruled by satraps, became a model for future empires, including the Islamic caliphates and even the British Empire. This system allowed for local autonomy while maintaining central control, a structure that influenced the governance of many later empires. The Persian king's ability to unite such a vast and diverse empire, stretching from the Indus Valley to Egypt, was a remarkable achievement, and their legacy in terms of governance still echoes in the political structures of modern nations. The Persian Empire also left a profound cultural legacy, particularly through the spread of Zoroastrianism, one of the world's oldest monotheistic religions. Zoroastrianism's influence on Judaism, Christianity, and Islam cannot be overstated. Concepts such as the struggle between good and evil, the idea of a final judgment, and the belief in an all-powerful deity are all rooted in Zoroastrian thought. This religious legacy continues to shape the spiritual traditions of the region, even if Zoroastrianism itself is no longer the dominant faith. Persian art and architecture also left lasting marks on the ancient world. The grand reliefs at Persepolis, depicting the Persian kings in their splendor, influenced the art of later empires. Persian carpets, known for their intricate designs and high quality, continue to be symbols of Persian cultural craftsmanship and beauty. Persian influence can also be seen in the architectural styles of Islamic empires, which adopted many elements of Persian design, including the use of gardens, courtyards, and intricate tile work. The Persian Empire's strategic location between East and West made it a crucial center of trade and cultural exchange. The Silk Road, which passed through Persia, facilitated the exchange of goods, ideas, and culture between Asia and Europe. Persian merchants, diplomats, and scholars played a key role in bridging the gap between the ancient civilizations of the East and West, influencing everything from philosophy and science to art and language. While Persia's direct political power waned after the Achaemenid Empire fell to Alexander the Great, its cultural and intellectual influence endured. Persian traditions were carried forward by later empires, particularly the Sassanids, who revived many aspects of Achaemenid culture and governance. The Sassanid Empire, in turn, influenced the rise of Islam and the Islamic caliphates, ensuring that Persian culture continued to shape the political and cultural landscape of the Middle East. In contrast to Rome, which became a dominant force in the Western world, Persia's legacy is most strongly felt in the East. Yet, it is no less significant. The Persian Empire's contributions to governance, religion, art, and trade continue to shape the Middle East and Central Asia today.